All right. So I'd like to welcome Travis Sawchik to the Bud Metheny chapter of SABR. In addition to co-authoring MVP Machine, which is the book we're going to review today, he also wrote Big Data Baseball, which looked at the Pirates' use of analytics to compete as a small market MLB team. He is a former staff writer for 538, Fangraphs, and previously covered the Pirates and Major League Baseball for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review and the Cleveland Indians for The Athletic, as well as the Clemson Tigers for Post and Courier. Travis has won National Associated Press Sports Editor Awards for enterprise writing and numerous state-level awards. He is a Cleveland native and a 2002 alumnus of The Ohio State University, OH.
That's right, IO.
All right, so it's always good to have a fellow Ohioan join us in our Bud Metheny meetings. I relocated 3 years ago, so
Okay.
I'm a Warren, Ohio native, and grew up and lived in Columbus for 35 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You just want a little warmer weather situation?
My wife works for Westminster Canterbury down here,
Okay.
which is a senior living facility. And so we moved down here so she could be closer to her work. And I retired from 20 years at JP Morgan Chase. So
Okay, great.
yeah, I'm trying to improve my golf game while I'm down here.
Well, congratulations on retirement and a long career. That's great.
Yeah, thank you. As I was reading the book, I guess, how did you and Ben decide what storylines to write, and then who would actually write each storyline? So kind of like the process of actually writing the book, because I found it really interesting that there were so many parallel storylines in the book, and they were so well covered. I was just kind of curious how you guys decided to do all that.
Yeah, we began the kind of division of labor by just looking at who we had access to, who we had relationships with, and who our typical sources and contacts were. And part of it was just geography based. I live in Cleveland, and Trevor Bauer's with the Indians at that point, so I was able to meet with him pretty easy and regularly. We did overlap. We both went on to Driveline. Ben had a good relationship with Brian Bannister, who's now the pitching instructor with the Giants. Doug Lotta, the hitting instructor, the independent hitting instructor, I'd spoken with for years, so I was kind of the point person with him. So we just kind of looked at who do we have relationships with, how can we divide this up, and we both edited and reviewed each other's work to try to make it seem a little more seamless, like it wasn't two different people writing the book, but we did write separate chapters. So it was pretty close to a 50-50 split. I don't know if I didn't do a final word tally for each of us, but yeah, that's just kind of how we came about it. It was just a lot of planning and then reporting, and there were some cases where I would interview someone for a chapter he was writing, or vice versa. But yeah, we kind of looked at what our strengths were and who our strong relationships were with, and we went from there.
And how did you guys end up co-authoring? Like, was it one or two? Was it one of your ideas and then you just found the other person, or was there did the publishing house put you guys together? How did that all happen?
Yeah, we both had the same agent who represented us on our previous books, or the same firm, and she was Ben's agent, and then my previous agent left in her firm. She became my agent. So, and I guess we were both discussing similar ideas with her, and she suggested we work together, or else she was going to have to, probably pick one of us or something like that. So Ben and I knew each other and respected each other's work. So we were happy to work together, and we felt it was, the book had to be written quickly. There's a timeliness, or there's a kind of current event genre of aspect to it. So we felt it needed to be written quickly. So there was some advantage to working with. There are advantages and disadvantages to working with someone on a project. But in this case, we wanted the book to be out quickly. And even as we were reporting it, all these driveline guys were getting hired. All these teams were kind of adopting some of the things we were reporting about. All these Edutronic cameras were being purchased. So we felt it really couldn't wait any longer, or else someone else would write it, or it wouldn't be as relevant. So
Right.
yeah, that was another incentive to work together, and that's how it came about.
Right. And then you mentioned you both went out to driveline. Were you able to complete the driveline testing process? You referred to it in the book, but you never got into much detail. How would you have fared as a baseball player?
Yeah, I very poorly. I did throw off the mound there, and my first throw went over the backstop netting behind their home plate, and their work. It was really embarrassing. You have all these. I had like 6 of their instructors watching me, and they work with high level athletes all the time, and then I have this terrible like 50-mile-an-hour throw that almost hits the ceiling. And I developed the yips in real time, and yeah, I was out there more to report and see how the sausage was made, so to speak. Ben
Right.
really wanted to go through the training and wear as many gadgets as he could, and I think we made the decision just to have kind of one person do that, to not. Maybe we both should have done it. I don't know, but we didn't. I didn't want to spend too much time on ourselves going through the training. I
Right.
wanted the
Right.
book to focus more on the actual actors and players in this story, and this what we felt was a revolutionary movement. So yeah, I don't. I do have some regrets about not going through it all. Maybe it would have been fun, but that's why I wasn't involved, and it would have been really embarrassing probably anyway. But
Did you throw a weighted baseball while you're out there?
I did throw up. I used some of the plyo balls that are the sand-filled, malleable,
Yeah.
kind of rubberized plasticky coating, and there is something to that. Like, once you change that constraint in that drill, it takes you out of that mindset of throwing a baseball, and you feel like, oh, I'm throwing something else, and I'm not so much worried about my mechanics, and I can let this rip. And I did. When I struggled with some of those early throws, Matt Daniels, who's now with the Giants, was like, "Hey, why don't you go over to the plyo board and just, throw some plyo balls against it?" And it did. It did help. Obviously, a small sample, but the weighted. I mean, there's different kinds of. Uh, I didn't go through a weighted ball regimen or anything
Okay.
like that, but
Now, I was just curious how different it felt when you were throwing a weighted ball versus a standard baseball. If you really could feel it or not.
oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely there's varying degrees of weight, of course, but yeah, you did. There are some of those weighted balls are definitely designed to get you away from the feeling of throwing a baseball, and there's
Yeah.
a kind of motor learning intent and developmental purpose behind that. Others are, the variations are slighter, but yeah, it was interesting to be there and just see the inner workings for sure.
Right. So
But I didn't add any velocity or anything. I'm probably
you,
still sitting 55 miles an
you're
hour
still
now.
sitting 50.
Now
So when you
maybe
go to the
maybe I
when you
could
go
get up
to
to 60 if I went through a whole program.
so when you go to Progressive Field and you throw in the radar area, you're still not hitting a personal best, huh?
Oh yeah, no, it's embarrassing, really. You think, oh, I can throw 70 miles an hour. No, it's like. So I do have a new appreciation for anyone who's on a professional mound. I mean, the skill level is they're in the upper 1% of the 1%. It's incredible what these major league pitchers can do, and I don't know how these hitters perform the way they do against where average velocity and movement is today. So
Right.
yeah, it was a humbling experience to to go out there. And even Kyle Bodie's like, after I airmailed that one throw and I was standing on the mound, he's like, "Not that easy, is it?" Like, no.
How many teams did you approach to talk about their use of technology and how many teams declined to actually share with you what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, I reached out to the Indians and they didn't want to talk about, or the Cleveland baseball team or whatever their name is going to be.
It's the Spiders. It's going to be the
It
Spiders.
could be the Spiders, yeah. And they didn't want, they felt like, why would we want to give away any of our, secrets?
Right.
And there were some cases like that. The reason for better or for worse, the reason the Astros were a focus is they were the primary. I mean, we're all aware of how they've damaged their reputation and how many people have lost jobs there, and deservedly so. But they were also the kind of the team that was most aggressive in adopting the technology and a lot of these new practices. And a lot of ex-Astros employees were hired by their teams before any of the scandals occurred. So yeah, I think that speaks to their place in it. And because so many people had left the Astros, they were willing to talk about their experience there. And Ben was a point person on the Astros chapter. It was, now we had to go update the book after the sign stealing and all that. And that puts a big dark cloud over anything they've accomplished. But, and I think it's a lesson to, they didn't need to do that. They would have been a very good team, very talented people had they not done. And I'm not even sure sign stealing had that great of effect on their performance. So I think it's, you wonder why they really, why they decided to do that. But yeah, that's the reason we were able to get the Astros is sort of a lot of the people broke up and left the organization, and we were able to speak to some of them on the record, some of them anonymously, but we were sort of fortunate that so many teams were interested in hiring folks from there because it allowed us to kind of see inside the machine there. That's why they're to focus. Now, like Jerry Dipoto at the Mariners he talked to Ben, I think, a little bit, and a few executives would give us kind of a 30,000 foot view of what they're doing in philosophies because most teams were beginning to dive in. But yeah, I think since Moneyball, there's not a lot of teams that really want to say, yeah, we'll let you in and we'll show you everything we're doing. And we didn't want this book to be that. We didn't want to be a narrative that was about a brilliant front office driving change from the top down. Really, we thought this was kind of a bottom up story where it was player driven. It was driven by outside instructors and iconoclasts outside the game. We felt that was the real story. It was sort of bubbling up to reach the top of the game. So we didn't want to make it we never wanted to make it a book about any one particular front office or team. So, and we also knew even if we wanted to do that, it'd be difficult. So that's a long answer, but yeah, I think the gist of it is, yeah, teams really don't want to let you in nowadays. So if anyone's going to write the next Moneyball and have that access, you're going to have to be the team will have to have some incentive to do that, and you'll probably have to be a really famous author.
Yeah. So based on what you knew when you wrote the book and where we've transitioned to today, I'm assuming that all major league teams are now in this game, but other than the Astros, what other teams have that maybe when you were co-authoring the book weren't in the middle of this, but have really jumped 2 feet in and are really trying to take advantage of the technology now to improve their lot in player development?
Yeah, I think, there are some laggards. I think the Rockies are a laggard, and I'm not sure the Marlins are on this, but I think with their new regime in place, they will be, their focus will be there. The Orioles transplanted a lot of Astros people in their leadership, so they're all in on this now too, and they had been a laggard. So I think every team is buying in to some degree. Every team is adding the technology into their training, getting their coaches and players to think differently about practice. I know I was just talking to Ben Cherington for a piece I did for Baseball America, and they're buying into this and they're trying to change the way they think about practice. So maybe some traditional practices do work and there's value to them, but we really need to rethink, is what we're doing at improving skill level, and is it worth our time? Because time is precious, and we really need to rethink every sort of drill and routine we're involved in. So I think every team is aware of the importance of player development and adding value to the players and coaches and growing their skill sets. But there's still going to be separation because some teams are going to have better implementation, better communication, better ideas, better drills, what have you. And it'll be hard to know how it plays out because a lot of this is going behind closed doors. We don't see the backfields in spring training. We have no idea really what happened in the alternate sites last year. Who was making better use of that situation? We have some minor league data, but it isn't as rich as the major leagues. So you can carve out a little bit of advantage, I think, because a lot of this happens behind closed doors and it's harder to copycat it. So if you can scale something first as an organization, like I think the Dodgers are really good. Indians, you look at the pitching development, the 2016 draft with Bieber, Plesac, Savali, McKenzie, and now Derek Falvey, who was there and helped orchestrate that, is with the Twins. Matt Blake was with the Yankees. He was with the Indians. So yeah, I think again, every team is interested, but some teams are going to execute better than others. And it's hard to know for sure who is. We know who the leaders were. It's hard to know who's made the greatest gains, and ultimately it should play out on the major league field. But I think it's hard to know right now who has made the biggest gains, who's still the furthest behind. But yeah, I suspect like Rockies probably have to go a long ways. Pirates are just getting started. Yeah.
What about on the international side? So the the Indians had opened a facility in Latin America, and I know a number of teams have opened Latin American facilities. Have they outfitted their international sites with the technology so they can better identify some of the skills of the players since they get them at such young ages in those parts of the world? And what about Japan? Are you aware of Japan using this technology at all?
Yeah, I believe the NPB, the KBO, those clubs they're very interested in. I know when I was, and this was 3 years ago now, I know some of the Korean teams are coming into Doug Lada's complex, or people from their front office or coaches, and they wanted to learn more about how he was teaching swing playing. And I think some of these teams also visited Driveline. So I believe the KBO and the Japanese clubs are using a lot of the same technology, and they might have been a little behind in the data revolution, but they're wanting to absorb as much of this as they can. And I know this book was printed in Korea and Japan, so there's foreign language edition. So there's some interest, and I think at least at the at the Latin American facilities teams have, I think they at least have the basics. Like they're at least getting exit velocity off of a workout or a batting practice session or a tryo camp, and velocity, spin reading. So they at least have the basics. I don't know how many people they're putting in. Like, I don't think they all have biomechanical labs. I don't think they're putting K-vests on everyone, but I think they're at least getting some more data. And we'll probably get eventually to the point where any 16-year-old who's at a showcase in the Dominican Republic or whatever foreign country, they're going to be put through the ringer, and it'll be sort of just as the NFL Combine kind of measures everything they can. Maybe they'll get to that point in baseball, and as we drill down deeper and deeper, there becomes like privacy concerns with how much data teams are capturing on everyone. Right. And that's it'll be interesting to see in the next labor negotiation how some of this, but that's getting off on a tangent. But yeah, to your point, it's not just domestically. We're going to see anyone playing baseball anywhere is going to want to have these, everything clubs. And I think even most players want to have as much measurable information, put as much feedback in the feedback loop as they can.
Well, you mentioned the data, and so look, I did have a couple questions around that. So as we as this is the last year of the current contract between MLB and the Players Union, where do you see the whole issue of player performance data fitting into that negotiation? especially as you get into arbitration rights and all those kinds of things. I mean, who owns the data, what you can use it for, where do you see that during this next set of negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, if I was just thinking about this as a player and agent, I would be concerned about how it was being used in arbitration cases, and are they going to try to make a case that I'm more prone to injury or something like that, or that I'm facing decline? So I certainly don't want it to be. I wouldn't want it to be used against me. Uh, at the same time, if you have great barrel rates and exit velocities, you probably want to use that in your case. So it's going to be an interesting. I don't know if that'll be I think it is an important issue. I think at the forefront, players, if they're making a priority list, I think they're more concerned about declining free agency revenues and the number of non-tenders occurring in arbitration, that sort of thing. So I think those will probably be up higher on the priority list. But I do think privacy concerns are becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and definitely it's only going to grow in scope, and yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't think it'll be the top of the list of this negotiation, but it will be part of the discussion.
Right.
And that's everywhere. I mean, how does Facebook use your data? How does Google tracking you? So it is. I think as a society, as a whole, we're having this discussion on privacy, and I don't think we've quite figured out how to best handle it yet.
Right. Alexa, I see you raised your hand. Do you have a question?
I was just going to chime in that there are rules about how data is used in arbitration cases. So because players are concerned that it will be used against them in a negative manner. But I do think as the players become more aware of their rights and ownership over their data, that will play a role in the next round of negotiations, because they're going to want more control over that.
All right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where that goes in a year, or in the upcoming years, I should say. So Trevor Bauer obviously was a main character of this book, and we all probably know a lot about Trevor Bauer, some of us more than others, but he definitely has a interesting personality, definitely a driven individual, definitely wants to get better. But so he comes to Cleveland and he introduces them to Driveline. So I guess my question is, and now Cleveland is kind of known as a pitching factory. So how much did Trevor Bauer actually drive Cleveland's development of their pitching factory? Do you have any insight into that in talking with Trevor or anyone else from the Indians?
Well, he had. I mean, he was one of the most significant drivers of it, no doubt about it. I mean, to the Indians' credit, one of the reasons they acquired him was because they wanted to learn from him. Derek Falvey wanted to learn from him, and Antonetti, a lot of their decision makers thought, they were looking to acquire a potential, useful starting pitcher, but they also knew his kind of mad scientist, experimental reputation, and they wanted to see if that could help them. So that was part of the draw to acquiring him. And I mean, when he was first acquired, he wanted to put his Edutronic camera out in the field and use it in his bullpens in Arizona. And Terry Francona didn't want it out there. Mickey Callaway didn't want him and his dad using this technology they weren't familiar with on the field. And now, of course, the Indians are putting everyone through the Edutronic system, and the weighted balls that no one was really using it to any widespread degree 5 years ago. Now you see them in every minor league bullpen. You see them all over the spring training complex, and he has. He has a lot to do with it. But I know, Bauer's a complicated person because he's offended many people. He's made a lot of mistakes on social media. He's been insensitive. So including him as a character was a challenge. But if you were talking about player development and who has contributed to the field, you can't write this book without him, because he is if not one of the most important drivers of this in the sport. I mean, this would have happened without him. What would have happened without Driveline, but they accelerated this movement. So yeah, you look at, I think Derek Falvey deserves a lot of credit. Matt Blake now with the Yankees, and you notice these people have been hired elsewhere, right? Because people know the importance of this, and there's still a lot of Eric Bender was another outsider who the Indians hired to bring in, who they met as they were kind of learning more about Bauer's process, the Driveline process, the Texas Baseball Ranch process. So yeah, I give the Indians a lot of credit for being curious, because they were, as a small budget, small market team, they need to look for every edge. So they have this incentive to look at player development, I think, before a lot of larger market teams. And that's part of the reason they went out to learn about Bauer, to learn about Driveline, to learn about the Texas Baseball Ranch, and to fold him in. And I want to, Derek Falvey deserves a lot of credit too, because he was maybe the first person in pro baseball to go to college clinics, and he wanted to see what are they doing at the college level, because essentially these are, how many Division I programs are there? 100, 200, 250?
Yeah, 235, something like that.
Okay. So, I mean, they're essentially 235 individual little laboratories with different coaches doing different things, different players trying different things. So Falvey would go after these college clinics, and he would want to see what technology were they experimenting with? What unconventional techniques were they trying? And that's where he met Wes Johnson, who is now, the Twins pitching coach. I think he was the first coach to be plucked directly from the college ranks to a major league dugout in 40 years. I think Baseball America reported that. And you've seen all these college coaches in recent years come into the game because Tanner Swanson had this interesting idea how to teach receiving, and he helped turn Mitch Garver into a suspect defensive player into a really good framer. And I think the Twins as an organization saw a huge leap in their ability to get to execute receiving. We all are aware of framing value. So he proved to some degree that can be taught more effectively than maybe we thought possible. And the Yankees hired Tanner Swanson. So you see how this kind of keeps going. And yeah, so Bauer deserves a lot of credit, but I think Falvey had this great curiosity about him to really go look for the best ideas. And that growth mindset we kept coming back to in the book, I think Falvey really represents that. He deserves a lot of credit, and I'm excited to see what he does long-term in Minnesota. He and Wes Johnson, because I think I was just talking to Wes Johnson about some of the command development they're trying, and they're doing fascinating things. So it's exciting to see. I still think we're in the early chapters of this player development revolution. And so yeah, again, another long rambling answer, but Falvey, Bauer, I give a lot of credit to, and even the top decision makers, just to identify that, yeah, we need to get ahead of this and develop a system, and it's working. I mean, that you look at Bieber, Plesac, Savali, they all have that. They've adopted that Bauer kind of elbow spiral, short arm action. They all throw the same way. And they all put the edgertronic on their pitches. They've all added a couple miles an hour. They've all sharpened a breaking ball, and you can see that impact of putting in a system. Can generate huge value for the player and the organization.
Did years ago, Mike Marshall was kind of the mad scientist of pitching, where he had different views than the conventional wisdom. Did you or Ben have an opportunity to talk to Mike about what's going on now and his thoughts on the biomechanics and how that relates to what's going on with these new techniques and technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it would have, maybe we should have done that. We sort of used the influences on Driveline, and he was one of them, to kind of showcase some of the pioneers and the history that led up to this moment. And he is he's an important pioneer, no doubt about it. Now, whether every idea is correct or not, I don't know. But so a lot of these ideas that are being implemented today aren't necessarily new. What's new is that the technology just exists to track, to measure, to get that feedback, to kind of train in a more intelligent manner. You're not searching as much because you get the information back immediately. If you change your index finger position on your curveball grip, it spins this way. The RPMs change, the axis changes, and if you go through a weighted ball regimen, they can track velocity improvement. So, if Branch Rickey had access to KVS and StatCast data, he would have been doing, pioneers in this field would have, not a lot of these ideas are new. It's just that technology is new, and so yeah, we did look at the history. We did want to credit the pioneers, and we didn't have a chance, or we didn't speak with Mike, but yeah, it might have been a good idea too. Is just we spoke to so many people, and there was a time constraint. It was just impossible. There were a lot of outside instructors who are having a big impact on the game we couldn't get to just because we did narrow the focus a bit. But
right.
Yeah.
Did teams? This is a question from Tom. Did teams have a resistance to implementing the kind of driveline type stuff into their pitching staff? I mean, do they still resist that, or are they more accepting at this point since they've seen it play out?
Yeah, no, I think certainly a lot of resistance. Even the Dodgers, who are one of the more progressive teams. Well, no, I should say it was the Rays when Friedman was leading the baseball operations for the Rays. He'd spoken to Kyle about, Kyle wanted to work there, and one of the assistant GMs had connected Kyle with Friedman, and Friedman's, I think this was 2014, 2013. He said, you got to prove this works before. None of my minor league coaches are going to buy into this. None of the players. You have to prove it works outside before you can come inside the game. And he was disappointed to hear that back then. But in retrospect, he thought he was right, and he did prove it. And then he got inside the game as the Reds hired him at the end of 19 to lead their minor league operation. So. Yeah, there's a ton of resistance. Even a team as forward thinking as the Rays in 2013, 2014 wasn't ready to buy in. It had to be proven at these little outside laboratories to get greater buy-in, and now we're seeing that. And it's really accelerated over the last few years. I think you'll see weighted balls in about every professional, whether it's a backfield or a bullpen, you'll see a lot of these implements you would have never seen before. We see the cameras are going to grow in nature. A few teams had an Edgertronic camera 3 years ago, and now Edgertronic is selling out of them because there's so many orders. So yeah, there's a lot of resistance early, and there's still varying degrees of resistance, but it's changing quickly.
There was some sections toward the end of the book on neuroscouting. Where is that in its? How many teams are using that or are trying to take advantage of that?
I think that's one of those next, because we realized this was still in the infancy of whatever happens next, and the technology and the AI and neural nets and all. I don't know if that's what you're speaking to exactly, but. Yeah, we're still early. The technology, the computing power is all going to continue to change quickly and dramatically, and some teams are gonna learn how to take advantage of that. The Twins hired an analyst who was, I think, using, and this is out of my knowledge area, but I think using some sort of neural net to predict performance in some degree. Yeah, so I can't really speak to this in great detail. We just realized that there's going to be a lot of step functions and development and progress in technology and computing power that we can't even imagine and wrap our minds around right now. But we did want to sort of note that there's still a lot of growth and things are going to change exponentially, and and that's an area where I think there's a lot of potential.
And what about the 3D biomechanical Proteus cameras and all that? Are teams now starting to accept that and use that more to try and prevent injuries, so to speak, and throwing motions and that kind of stuff? Is that becoming more prevalent?
I believe so. yeah, I think teams wanted the best possible biomechanical evaluations and information they can have. And ideally, you'd get to a point where you get game data, a markerless system that can really give you every three-dimensional movement aspect and measurement you can you could have, and try to use it to prevent injuries. Obviously, I think if it's not the holy grail, it's close to, you know, the biggest breakthrough you could have from biomechanics to for the player and the club to keep people healthy is that would be a major breakthrough. And I think maybe there is some progress being made in some of the movement patterns teams and coaches have studied and learned from. The Indians haven't. I mean, Mike Clevenger had some injury issues, but their current rotation right now has been pretty injury. Well, Tristan McKenzie is, so I don't know. No one's figured out, but a Bieber stayed healthy, Bauer stayed healthy, Savali. So it'll be interesting to see if some of these teams that have adopted some of the new motor learning ideas on motor learning and shortening the arm angle or arm circle. Lucas Giolito is a guy who shortened his arm action and had a breakout. Jamison Tyone is trying to do the same thing this year, and I'm curious to see how he performs at the Yankees. Now, Robbie Ray tried it and it didn't work out last year, so it's not. There is still a very training needs to be individualized. If you have great arm speed, you probably don't need to go in a weighted ball program if you can already touch 97 miles an hour. So I do want to hammer on that, where not everyone should go through the same training regimens. And to a lot of teams' credits, I think they realize that training has to be individualized. Here's what the data tells us on strengths, weaknesses of players, what they need to focus on, what they need to build on. But not a weighted ball program isn't for everyone. If you have the game's best slider, you probably don't need to be on the Edutronic trying to make it better. You know, you could probably do something else. So probably another tangent I went off on, but you got me thinking. So
Ray, you had a comment about neurotechnology. You're on mute, sir. There you go.
Yes, as you know, in my former life as a neurologist, I was interested in the neurology of sports, and there was a book written in 1996 by a guy named Harold Klawans, who was a neurologist, who was a baseball fanatic, who also was an author. He was a specialist in Parkinson's disease, movement disorders, and the book was called "Why Michael Couldn't Hit," and other other tales of neurology from sports. And the first chapter was why Michael Jordan could not learn to hit a baseball well enough to progress beyond AA. And the idea is, and this is related to the neurological theory of learning, is that every skill that we learn has a window of opportunity in which we can learn it. Music has an earlier window of opportunity. Language, for example, that's why kids who pick up a foreign language as a child can speak it easier than an adult who tries to learn a foreign language. And the thought about Michael was that Michael tried to learn to hit a baseball after his window of opportunity closed. Despite being one of the best athletes in the world, he couldn't develop that skill because his window of opportunity to develop that skill and lay down those neural networks that were important it was just beyond the time for him to do that. So I thought that it's interesting that so I bring that up only because I tie it to another question. How far down into youth baseball does this technology go? And are we getting people in their window of opportunity to learn how to hit, for example, to take advantage of this technology?
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
Before you pick up on that, I want to leverage that question. So baseball's really struggling with, baseball's struggling with youth participation, right? The rates are not what they used to be. And a lot of it, and it's getting very expensive to participate too, because everything's going, all these clubs and everything. So along with Ray's question, where do you see, the less advantaged population, right? That are they even going to be able to play baseball or perform in baseball? Because you got to get to it at a young age, and you need these technologies to start to perform. So what are your thoughts along with, how deep is this going? Are clubs doing it? But then what is it really going to do to developing players as we move forward in the less advantaged parts of our society?
Yeah, no, those are two great questions. And I guess I misunderstood the previous question. I was thinking more about AI than kind of the general mental development of skill. But yeah, that's interesting. Can hitting be learned? And Jordan's such a great case study because he was one of the greatest athletes, of course, of all time, and he couldn't hit. Now, he didn't dedicate, he had taken such a long break from playing baseball. What if he would have spent 10 years on it? I don't know. But yeah, you think about a lot of the musical prodigies, and they started to do that deliberate deep practice so early in life. So that is interesting. Yeah, it's, and then I think about, but a lot of these, Justin Turner, Marlon Byrd, Mookie Betts, a lot of guys have made swing changes, but maybe you can make the change if you already have developed that, I guess, coordination, timing skill of hitting the baseball, which maybe takes a long time to develop and can only be developed in a certain window. So,
I think
yeah,
that's the key is developing the basics of eye-hand coordination to hit a moving baseball. And if you do that early in the window, then later on in life, like with Justin Turner and some of the players you mentioned in the book, they can make the changes needed to improve or to be more effective.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think any of these guys started trying to hit a baseball when they were 18. They all started when they were 4 or 5 years old. And then once you have that baseline, what you're saying is you can then you can build off that and make adjustments, but you cannot learn a completely, you probably cannot learn to hit at 35 and be a major league player. I think teams are curious, what skills can be improved most easily at what ages. And I'm interested in, there's been so much focus on velocity. You have to hit 95 miles an hour to be drafted in the first round. There's a stadium radar gun reading at every ballpark. We're all interested in who can hit 98, 99, 100. But because there's so much velocity training, I think the command element maybe speaks this a little bit. Should command be more valued? Because I look at, to some extent, what the Mariners are doing with Gilbert, or they've targeted, I think, some of these high command pitchers, just as the Indians had with Bieber, Plesac, Savali in that draft. They're all strike throwers in college who they added velocity and sharpened breaking balls to. Is command a skill that has to be developed earlier in life and should be more prized on draft boards and international free agency because it's a harder skill to build? So your question has me thinking about that. And I know teams are thinking about, okay, what skills can we develop the best in our program, in our process, our scouting development infrastructure, and what do we need to acquire because we cannot develop it as easily? So I think there is that discussion, and those assessments are being made. And to the other question, I think there is this concern about baseball is already the domestic player pool is already becoming increasingly, I believe, it's not very diverse. It's a lot of middle upper class kids who have the ability to play on travel ball showcase tournaments and have access now to this technology that gives them another chance to separate themselves over those who do not have access to it now. And we did write about that to some degree in the book. It wasn't, we did touch on the subject. We didn't devote a whole chapter to it. Maybe we should have, but yeah, that is a concern. It's just another separator to who has access to this information that can improve them. And right now it's a select cohort of the younger population in the country. Now, as time goes on and technology becomes cheaper, maybe that becomes less problematic, but maybe there's something else that's expensive and only the elite have access to. So yeah, that is, baseball has to find a way to not only appeal to a more diverse audience, but also a more diverse player pool. And I would argue that those kind of go hand in hand, where if you like watching baseball and participating, you'll be more likely to participate in it. And if you participate in it, you're more likely to be a paying customer down the road. So yeah, those are deep questions that have that are part of this and part of the data story and technology story. And I don't know if I have the best answers to them, but we did try to tackle them a little bit in the book, and they are concerns. And I don't know that anyone has a great answer to what do you do to that divide of those who have access to this information, those who not. I think ideally teams would bring it to, if the kids don't have access to it and but they're a promising athlete, you find a way to help them have access to it in some way.
Adam, you had some thoughts on the access to this from a coaching perspective?
I do. I think what I would say to that is, and I coached kids between about, I'd say 6 and 11 years old. And so these were kids who were probably not at the age where you'd really start specializing just yet. And I'll turn on my camera too. And there weren't a lot of kids who played baseball and soccer, but they tried. And what I found was, for baseball, they'd have a couple games a week and a couple of practices a week. So often that would conflict with soccer practices that were usually a couple days a week and games on Saturdays. But I think the larger thing that Andrew was getting into is something that I think is really worth thinking about, which is access overall, and access to things like the advanced imaging, the advanced training, and that there really is a socioeconomic dimension to that. That I think is really important to explore. And even where I am at the National Institutes of Health right now, I'm at the National Library of Medicine. So we're starting to think increasingly about access and serving underserved populations with medical information. And this definitely fits into a wellness discussion. So if we want people and kids to take advantage of sports, feel like sports are for them, how do we make that really broadly accessible? So thanks for a great conversation here. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Yeah, it's a whole important, interesting topic. And yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of firsthand, experience with this and knowledge. And yeah, I mean, it's tough. There are this isn't necessarily about disadvantaged groups, but like what we can do with a mobile phone now, it's helped some people be scouted just by the data they can pick up on their phone and what they can put on a Twitter, Instagram account, and it has helped people that would have been lost even sign pro contracts because of just social media and technology, the flat ground app, and there's going to be more and more apps for phones that can measure performance and that sort of thing. But yeah, so that part of it is encouraging, and some of those costs could come down. But yeah, there is the wellness point and the gap between who has access to it and who doesn't right now is a big problem. And it's compounded just in general by the cost of baseball to participate as a young person. Because I don't think you want to overwhelm 7 and 8 year olds with data, but you do want them playing. You do want them to have access to equipment. And then once they become teenagers, and I think then the performance measuring technology, those costs become more important, I think. But yeah, we could talk for hours about this. This is a very, very question. But yeah, it's a great question.
So where do you, Travis, where do you think scouting is going to go? In-person scouting. I mean, we have one of our folks, Alexis, is a budding scout, and with the use of the technology and the cameras and all that, how much teams are cutting their scouting staff. So what's it going to mean for those folks that You know, how are you going to need scouts to discover players anymore? Or are teams just going to is it going to be like back in the 20s and 30s where they just open their stadiums, have people come try out, and they have the cameras and they evaluate them mechanically and say, here are the guys that hit all the numbers, let's take them and we'll work with them.
Yeah, it's I mean, I personally love playing scout. I have a lot of friends who are scouts, and I know some of them just when StatCast came online and they saw that it could measure, average lead length, pop times, and they were worried like, wow, a lot of the things we do are going to be automated, and I know it scared them. And we've seen the Astros get just basically axe their entire pro scouting staff and replace it with some Fangraph style folks looking at video and writing analysis. And that is for a part of the game. Scouting's been part of the game since it existed, and I think that human element still matters. I do think the focus has to shift, though. It has to be less about measuring things by hand at a game and more about I mean, if I was a baseball decision leader, I'd want to know about the makeup of players. Are they open to making adjustments? Are they curious? What is their work ethic like? Are they going to take advantage of all these new tools and informations to become as good as they could? Do they want to be great? Are they going to take advantage of all these new tools we have in the game? So maybe the shift becomes a little bit more towards understanding who the people are, but that's an element of scouting. They makeup grades. Baseball makeup has always been part of the game. Maybe that becomes more important. And there's got to be some value in seeing someone in person, and maybe the biomechanical information will get so great that maybe teams won't need scouts to give an assessment of the fluidity of mechanics, that sort of thing. But yeah, I still believe there'll always be a place for the human element in scouting, and I just think the skills might have to shift. What is important about the job might have to shift. But I am worried about teams reducing head counts and using technology to replace people, because I still think scouts are really important.
Yeah. Alexis, do you have any thoughts on that?
Of course I have thoughts. Let me just share my video. Sorry, I'm walking all over my house, so I'm listening. I actually presented at SABR Seminar after I read your book. And I talked to Ben. I interviewed Ben before I did a presentation. I did a presentation on scouting mental makeup.
Oh, cool.
2 years ago at SABR Seminar, because I read your book. I read some of the other books, Growth Mindset, Carolyn Dweck, all that stuff kind of after I saw your book. And that was exactly my thought. I'm like, will mental makeup become the new hot, metric, if you will, something about how we evaluate the mental makeup of a player? Will that become more important than anything else they do? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not actually like really into the mental side. I'm just kind of, researching where I can and on top of scouting and all this other stuff. But I was really curious because I felt like maybe that was the area that, in my experience with player evaluation, wasn't taken into consideration enough when looking at players in person, because obviously now teams are just hiring people to do video. And so I was like, okay, well, what are you losing? And I still think you have to evaluate the human being. And so this was 2019, so 2 years ago, but I was just really curious about if, that would shift. And I think the hard part for me was like, I'm kind of new to scouting. Like, this is only year 4. Do I come in and flip this, this job that's been done for, decades before me and be like, you're doing it all wrong? Baseball doesn't like when people come in and tell them that they've been doing it wrong. And so I was really hesitant to kind of push on it, but I did, I talked to the woman that runs the Wake Forest baseball's pitching lab about how they were evaluating, mental makeup and starting to put evaluations in with their kids, and every year kind of following and tracking those type of things. So I'd be curious to see. And I talked to some team psychologists with the Rays, with the Cubs, just to kind of get an idea about what teams are doing. Obviously, they don't want to share everything, but it was, it was really interesting. And I do wonder still now if we'll see kind of that trend change in terms of evaluating the mental makeup of players more than we do now.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I'd love to see your presentation you made. Yeah, no, I think like I have a lot of experience with the Cleveland team just because I live here and I've been in the clubhouse and talked to those guys. And think about someone like Francisco Lindor, who, when he was coming up, he did get 80 makeup grades because people who were around him said, "Oh, this guy loves the game more than anyone. He is such a worker," and this and that. And when he was at Low A Lake County, I saw him play like, what was this, 20? I don't even know what year it was, but this was a guy hitting weak ground ball. He was making contact, but the few times I saw him was like super weak and like, I don't know, is this guy ever going to hit? But he was like the ultimate worker. He kept improving at different skills and he developed. No one had Francisco Lindor then being a 30 plus home run hitter. And I know maybe some of that's the ball and whatnot, but he optimized his contact. He understood how he could improve to become the best player he could be. And I think that's kind of speaks to what you're saying about this importance of if you didn't have that 80 makeup grade on Lindor, you might not, and you just saw him play in a given day and he was making weak contact and you thought maybe he's a low offense shortstop. But if you put that 80 makeup grade on him, it might change your whole view of how he could grow and develop. So yeah, I think that's a really smart uh, uh, way to think about the future scouting and the importance of the makeup grade. And yeah, I think I know it's kind of marrying psychology and scouting, but I sort of think that's where it needs to go because everyone's going to have the same data on players who can grow and how do you understand who can grow. So I think those are definitely important areas to look into and evaluate.
Travis, with the technology now and all the cameras, are teams now looking at like pitcher umpire combinations or pitcher umpire catcher combinations to try and get an advantage of like when Shane Bieber's on the mound and Joe West is behind the plate, this is
Oh
what the
boy.
strike zone is versus, you know what I mean? And so
Right.
those combinations. So are teams starting to look at that? Because when I watched last year's playoff games, you know, Bieber, the Yankees just would not swing at anything that spun, right? They knew it was going to dive out of the zone because that's how he pitches. So it's almost like they were necessarily they scouted his ball flight with the umpire and knew that they weren't going to be called strikes, where other umpires may have called them strikes. So are teams starting to do that to get a better advantage on the hitting side?
They I know most teams will in the pregame information they give to players, oftentimes they'll receive a handout of scouting. Like if you're a Yankees hitter, you'll get a heat map and scouting data on Bieber if he's that day starting, and you also get one on the umpire, and they'll go over this in meetings. Like this is the tendency of the umpire and the pitcher, so they do take that into account. Now, I don't think teams are moving around the rotation to match up pitchers with umpires, but yeah, they scout the umpires just like they scout opponents. And I do remember that game, and the Yankees had a phenomenal approach against Bieber that night. And Bieber he had pitched as well as anyone, as we all know, that year. And Yankees made him look like a mid-rotation starting pitcher. And yeah, that was a phenomenal approach. And I do think we're probably moving towards an automated strike zone, I would think, at some point. I just think that's going to happen. But yeah, I think it's smart to look at umpire tendencies, and teams are doing that. And I think almost every team is. Well, I can't say for sure, but I would suspect most teams are considering not just the player tendencies, but the umpire tendencies in that calculation of pregame meetings and all
Who's
that.
ahead now, pitchers or hitters?
I still think pitchers have the edge in development just because they dictate the action. The technology has helped them more, I think, learn how to shape pitches, learn how to add velocity, and maybe we get to a point where command training improves and that becomes a thing too. So I think they've had the early data edge. I think hitters are catching up and they're learning more about their own biomechanics in a swing and optimal swing paths, and that and those sorts of things. And plate discipline, I think, is something that can be improved through database training and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think the technologies help pitchers early, and just because they dictate the action, they hold the ball, I think they still have the edge in. I'm just amazed that 2009, the average fastball was like 91 and a half. Now it's almost 94. And part of that, it's a little bit more of a bullpen game, but starting pitching velocities up 2.5 miles an hour in a decade, that's just crazy. And then breaking pitchers are moving more. The skill development is just really, I don't know how you hit. I don't know how these guys do it. It's wild.
So what's interesting is with all the technology making pitchers better and hitters better, it seems like the game isn't as exciting as it used to be. So is the technology going to, how do you see the technology working with the fan entertainment value, right? I mean, it's like everything's the 3 true outcomes now.
Right.
And that doesn't always give you the best entertainment experience.
Yeah, I would have been really curious to see if that Atlantic League they were going to move the mound back last season, had there been a season. And I was curious to see how that would affect the game. Like, does baseball have to do something dramatic like that to put more balls in play, have more action? I do think those would both be good for the game. And maybe hitters will develop, maybe they'll shrink this golf in developmental gains, and we will see strikeout rates come down, but I don't think that's going to happen. I personally don't mind watching baseball in its current state, and I'm okay with it. I like seeing a 14 strikeout game, and I like seeing home runs, but I do think, having a more athletic running element, more balls in play would be good. And maybe if baseball can just get more kids playing the game, widen the player pool out a little bit, maybe that solves part of these problems by just having a greater player pool. You should get ultimately better players to develop, and maybe that is part of the equation too. But yeah, we'll see how this new ball affects play. Maybe they should lower the mound. It's tough because it does feel like this developmental the way the players are developing skills, the way the game is evolving, it does feel like we are just on a path to more strikeouts every year, more home runs, and I can see why that turns off people, and it slows the game down too, as at bats become longer and pitchers. I would like to see I think pitches should be fired off more quickly, and maybe that would bring velocity down a little bit too. But then you have to do you want to put a clock on the game? I think obviously we're going that route too, apparently. So yeah, I don't know. Those are great questions. There is something to be said for this whole movement, taking away the aesthetic pleasures of watching a baseball game.
Have you had the opportunity to see this year's baseball and get a sense for how different it is from years past? Right? They're saying, I almost laughed when I read that they said, well, this year's baseball will only travel 5 feet less on a 375 foot fly. I'm like, well, shit, people are hitting 450 foot. It's not going to impact that. So I'm kind of curious, have you had an opportunity to actually see and touch the new baseball, or anybody, as a matter of fact, on this call?
No. Yeah, I'd like to do kind of a blind test and see if I could actually distinguish. I doubt I could. And that, 5 feet, that might affect a player like Kevin Biggio, who gets the most out of his ability, but I think his exit velocities on the lower end. And but for most players, I don't think it'll have a dramatic effect. We'll see though. I also doubt baseball's ability to execute a change like that. It could, what if they take 20 feet off and they have this really squishy baseball? I don't know. And I hate that we have to talk about the ball every year. That just that seems unnecessary too. But maybe you change the ball and you get more balls in play. You change the incentive of the batter. But to your question, no, I've not had a chance to experiment with the ball, but I am curious, like everyone else, to see how it plays out. And having to adjust my fantasy draft boards a little bit to take into account of what happens to Jose Ramirez if he loses 5 feet off his fly ball distance. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be fascinating to see that play out.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions for Travis?
I have one question going back really to the first part of this discussion that I've been wondering about since. With the talk about keeping information within organizations, isn't that basically impossible with the personnel changes and players going from one organization to another, as far as other clubs finding out what a particular club is doing?
Oh, just I didn't hear the first part of your question, but just as the players, coaches move around, is it tough to keep secrets of
Yes,
that sort
right.
of? Yeah, I think the information share, you can't suppress that probably very well, but I think the implementation, you have to, even if you know the idea, do you have the right people to communicate it? Do you have the right technology and infrastructure in place to capture and maximize gains off of having that information? So it is, I don't think the information is, the best practices might be known, but executing and implementing them is the challenge. Like Elon Musk liked to say, it's easy to build a prototype. It's a lot harder to build like 500,000 versions of that prototype. It's harder to make the manufacturing infrastructure than it is to make prototypes. So I think that speaks a little bit to it, and why a team like, before the Astros broke up, they had a huge advantage, and I think the Indians have a little pitching development advantage right now. But yeah, as information shares, teams will catch up, but then will they catch up to the next thing that teams are working on? So it is this kind of cat and mouse, endless circle kind of game going on. But to your point, yeah, it's hard to keep a secret, but I think it's difficult to maybe implement and maximize on that information.
Do you have any? Go ahead.
I was wondering if the paperback revisions are available in the Kindle version.
Is the book available in the Kindle version?
Well, I know it's available, but is it? Are the paperback revisions included now?
Oh, the updated version? Yeah, it should be. The latest version should be on Kindle.
Do you have any current books in progress that you're writing, or are you going to update this now that Bauer won the Cy Young Award?
Well, hopefully we don't have to update it again, like what happened with the Astros, right? Like that was uncomfortable. But yeah, I don't think we would probably have to update it with another scandal rocked one of our major participants. But I think we've put this one to bed. I have some other. Hopefully there'll be another book someday. I have some ideas, but nothing imminent.
May I ask Travis a question? Recently in a Sports Illustrated issue, there was an article about Dr. Willis's experiment with baseballs, where she cut them and looked at the variances between baseballs that were made the last few years and how it affected the weight, the seams, etc. Do you have any comments on that article?
Well, yeah, Meredith's done a lot of great work on the ball, and it would be nice to know. I mean, I would be frustrated just as a executive, a coach, a player. Like, what materials am I dealing with this year? How should I adjust my game, my craft? And it seems like from year to year, no one really knows what's going on. And you'd like to think if Major League Baseball can get all this data and put in StatCast and all these new technologies, they could make a consistent, fair baseball. But that seems like it's been a challenge. So yeah, I think one thing that's being lost in all the ball talk is I don't think we're giving hitters credit for changes I think there's this desire to say the ball explains all these home runs. I mean, it probably explains a lot of them, but it it takes away from a story like Justin Turner, JD Martinez, who changed their careers with the less bouncy ball. I mean, they remade their swings. They became power hitters in 2014 with I think what was considered a more fair baseball. And there are hitters, just like golfers try to reduce spin to increase ball flight. There are now hitters who are using Rapsoda to try to reduce spin and increase ball flight. So there's other factors beyond the ball, but yeah, Meredith's done a lot of great work. And I don't know if I've seen her Sports Illustrated article, but I'm well familiar with what she wrote for The Athletic and her other studies to show that, yeah, it does appear beyond a doubt that the ball is made more lively. So yeah, it is a contributing factor, but I don't think it should be looked as the only factor. I think we need to give hitters a lot of credit for the power displays and how they've optimized their swings. You still have to square up the baseball to hit it a long way.
Thank you.
Meredith is going to update her baseball investigation at the SABR Analytics Conference in March. I saw she's on the, she's like an annual
She's going to be on there every year as they change the ball every year.
Yeah.
I mean, the ball is also, you have a hand-stitched product. I just wonder, what can the quality, I don't know enough about the manufacturing process, but it seems like if you were hand-stitching a baseball, there's always going to be a high level of variance too. But I'm not an expert in the ball field. Meredith and others are, and yeah, she's made a real industry of this. And every year she should be presenting because the ball's going to be a little. Every time you cut up a ball, it's going to be a little different.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me about the book was that some of the techniques used by these trainers in pitching really go back quite a while. Weighted balls, for example, throwing footballs. In 2007, when I turned 60 years old, I started playing senior softball again. And at my first practice, I wanted to show off how good my arm was, and I tore my labrum and damaged my rotator cuff. Now, I had a choice of getting surgery and not being able to throw for a minimum of 6 months, or going to rehab. And I had already made a deposit on a fantasy camp for 4 months later. So I went through rehab. And I went to a physical therapist who used to be a trainer for the Chicago White Sox. And so it was me and a bunch of high school and college kids learning how to throw again. And we used weighted balls and we used footballs. And I made it to the fantasy camp and was able to throw strongly from third base, the position I was playing. And ever since then, every preseason for senior softball, until I retired from senior softball a couple of years ago, I've gotten in shape by throwing footballs. And that's how I got my arm in shape. And so, they're using these things now with advanced technology, complementing it. But these are things that people use before for a long time.
Oh yeah, no, it's a great point. And yeah, we talked about in the book, like, Brand Tricky had a lot of revolutionary player development ideas. And I mean, he was trying to teach plate discipline and he had some success with a guy like Duke Snyder. And weighted balls have existed a long time. I think even one of like the 1890s pitchers, one of the maybe it was, I don't know if it was old Haas Rasper or someone, but he warmed up with an iron ball. So a lot of this stuff goes back decades. Of course, the change is we can measure everything now and you get the feedback and it's easier to determine the efficacy of something. But yeah, there's not a lot of what's truly original in baseball. That's hard. I don't know if there's a lot of truly original things. I think there's a lot of things that can be built upon and improved, and the feedback loop is better today. But to your point, yeah, a lot of what we think of as new in baseball, launch angle. Ted Williams was talking about launch angle 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and the riding fastball is something people have, thought had value for years. They just didn't know the spin rate. I mean, even in Moneyball, I think the A's kind of said catchers have no value, but it turned out they did, and we measured pitch tracking allowed for framing to be measured, and turned out catchers were really, their defense was hugely valuable. So, which traditional people had always thought. So, traditional minded evaluators, whatnot. So, yeah, to your point, I don't know if there's a lot of truly original things, but the data is just the tracking tools have allowed for a lot more adoption and less resistance in recent years.
When I was younger, I helped coach a youth baseball team, and most of the players were between the ages of 9 and 12 or 9 and 11. And we often had to practice at an alternate site, a city park that was close to a creek. So when we first started coaching, we had many ball players hit balls, foul balls into the nearby creek. So the city provided, the bats and the balls and the bases. And so we were left with plenty of water-soaked balls and not very many, regular balls. So the other coach and I decided, can we use the waterlogged balls? So we had the players, rather than, warming up, let's say 50 feet or so, we practiced throwing those waterlogged balls maybe 15, 20 feet. And we did that. Then in scrimmages, we used the regular balls. And we soon discovered that it helped the players, even though they were quite young, to throw the ball much further than they were normally doing. And then we also tried to extend by using the regular balls rather than throwing, let's say, from third to first. We started closer and then extended the throw, hoping that more kids could find first base from throwing from third base. And we were surprised that the kids were able to throw more accurately and further at such a young age by using the heavier baseballs.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And actually, Trevor Bauer and his dad, when they first kind of started out on this process of how to engineer a pitcher, those were their first weighted balls. They dumped a bunch of baseballs in a gallon of water, or a bucket of water, and those were his first weighted balls. And to the prior question, the weighted ball implements, and he tries to throw his there's a lot of carryover, I think, in like a quarterback throwing motion to what he's trying to do with his arm circle and his delivery, and even how he throws a slider. So some of these different implements, weighted balls, footballs, it's interesting how they kind of help the body self-organize in the most efficient way. You're not even the beauty is you're not even thinking about it. There's no coach telling you, put your arm here, your hand there. It's this motor learning process of kind of innate, the body just organized in a way that is most efficient on its own, and you're not even consciously thinking about it, and it develops these better movement patterns. And I love drills and implements and constraints that do that. I think it's a really beautiful, smart way to coach someone, or whether it's a young athlete or an older athlete.
It's hard to follow some of the science that you have in your book. I'm fairly technologically speaking savvy, but it's pretty complex stuff you got there. Is there stuff on the other videos, stuff on the internet that people can look at to get a feel what something like Driveline and all these other, and Edgerton and all, what it really looks like?
Yeah, I think if you just search YouTube, there's a lot of Driveline videos on there, and I'm sure if you searched Edgertronic camera baseball, there'd be all sorts of examples. But I know Driveline had a series of videos that try to explain some of their concepts, and I can try to find one right now while we're on here, and I'll put it in the message board. But yeah, there's a lot of I've used YouTube a lot to do a lot of home improvement projects and fix things this year, and you can learn a lot about Driveline and some of these concepts in the book too. Let's see if I can find this one here.
There's also quite a few YouTube showings on the former pitching coach Johnny Sane with his spinner, teaching pitchers how to throw the slider while using his little device that he invented. And it's a short video, maybe 10 minutes or so.
That's interesting.
All right. Well, it is 11:26. We have had Travis for an hour and a half. I want to thank you for joining us. It was a great conversation. I personally really enjoyed you and Ben's book. I still hold a grudge against Trevor Bauer for playing with drones during the World Series, but now I hold less of a grudge because I understand it was his mental release that he was trying to do. But you know, bad stuff happens sometimes, so I guess
Yeah,
you just got to take the good with the bad.
yeah.
But I thought it was very entertaining and well written book. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and it was a real pleasure to speak with you and your in the group today. And yeah, it's great to see interest and enthusiasm for the book. So we do really appreciate it. I mean, we learned a lot along the way, and we figured if we were learning a lot, hopefully anyone who read the book would be engaged and learn some things too. So thank you.
All right. Well,
Travis.
Thank you.
everyone, good luck. There's baseball coming soon. It's getting warmer out, and can't wait to see all you guys at a local baseball park this year.
Uh,
All right.
All right.
Sounds
Take
great, yeah.
care.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew, for
Yeah.
organizing this. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.